Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on my next Legal Lines where we have our United States Senator David Vitter. David hadn't been on the show in over a year, couldn't believe it. But we're going to talk about some very serious issues. Is America safe? Not only within our boundaries, on our borders, but are we safe from international threats? And do we have a security issue with immigration? And finally, are we safe economically? So join us on the next Legal Lines with our United States Senator David Vitter when we discuss those issues. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Hello, welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and frankly, we're continuing the previous show with our United States Senator, David Vitter. David, again, thanks so much for doing this with me.
Thanks for the invite.
Can't believe it's been another year.
I was going to make a joke and say we just happen to wear the same clothes as the last year, but you gave the secret away.
I pretty much wear the same clothes all the time. Let's dive into security.
Sure.
It is such a big issue, and frankly, it bleeds into immigration in some ways, particularly given the fact that we just went through an extraordinarily traumatic event in Boston.
Yeah.
Tell me what your thoughts are. Is America, within its geographic boundaries, safe?
Well, it's a constant challenge, particularly in the post 9/11 world. You know, like all of us want to forget about that stuff and feel like we're secure. But I think it's a very important reminder that we are at war, or at least there are a lot of people at war with us in terms of this global Islamic jihad attack on the West. And we need to remember that because it is a war, and in some ways it's a more challenging and more dangerous war than traditional wars. So it was perhaps an important wake-up call, horrible event, and of course we still keep in mind and pray for the victims.
You know, I've heard reports now that we were actually, our federal various agencies, appropriate agencies, were advised by Russia that they had information that the older brother of these two bombers, the one that was killed, was suspect, and we need to be watching out, and somehow that didn't seem to happen.
Yeah, apparently they looked into the older brother in a relatively superficial way and then walked away from it. I know there are a lot of folks in Congress, particularly the intelligence committees, looking hard at that to see, you know, we don't want to play the blame game. We don't want to point fingers,
fix this.
But we need to fix it. And so we need to understand if somebody dropped the ball, or we need to understand what to do better the next time. And I know the intelligence committees and others are looking at that.
You know, I'm actually worried. I saw a congressman, looked like he was brand new from Arkansas, gave a speech on the House floor, and it's what we were discussing earlier, that in the last 4 years, we've been attacked 5 times. Boston, Fort Hood, the Arkansas recruiter, the underwear bomber, and then the Times Square. 3 out of those 5 events were successful, and but for God intervening, let's say, in Times Square in the airplane,
absolutely,
tragedy again.
Yeah, and you take those 2 cases that, thank God, didn't produce big losses or losses. The line between a so-called non-event and a horrendous event with potentially dozens or even hundreds of fatalities, that's a pretty thin line.
That's right.
And in both of those cases, partly just because of sheer luck, we avoided those losses. So again, very important reminders that we need to take cognizance of.
Do you have an opinion? I've read various articles and heard various opinions that the way President Bush dealt with the security concerns differs from President Obama, and yet then I've also heard President Obama has actually carried on a lot of the policies. Do you know?
Well, I think there is some continuity, but a lot of differences too. In a lot of ways, Locke, I think there's a core different approach that some folks bring to the matter. President Bush, for sure, considered this war, pure and simple.
Right.
It's a different kind of war, very non-traditional war, but it was always crystal clear in his mind that this was war. I think folks on the left, including President Obama, want to get back into the mode of thinking this is a law enforcement issue, at least in some cases. And that's a big difference.
Right.
I think it's a big difference in terms of policy. It's a big difference in terms of how you respond. I'll give you one very clear example. After this latest Boston bombing, and the younger brother was apprehended, of course, after his older brother was killed, they did not read him his Miranda rights immediately.
Right.
They wanted to question him without that. But the other half of the story, which was largely underreported, is it wasn't very long, about a day later, they did tell him he had the right to remain silent. They did give him a lawyer.
And he shut up.
And surprise, surprise, he hasn't said a word since. There's one example where I'm pretty confident the Bush administration would not have done that early. And I think there was plenty of grounds to not do that early. Now, he's an American citizen.
Right, and that is a distinction. It is an interesting dilemma in which we're
I'm
in.
not saying send him to Guantanamo.
Right.
I'm not saying try him in a military tribunal, which is not allowed.
Right.
Ultimately, he has to be tried in a civil federal court.
Right.
It's a federal charge. I'm not disagreeing with any of that, but there was not the need, in my opinion, to give him a lawyer and tell him he has the right to remain silent that quickly. There was a legitimate debate whether he was an enemy combatant, and he could have been questioned much more thoroughly.
More like a military.
Correct.
Right?
Without those interventions.
And in fact, I think there's an exception where if there's an imminent threat, they're concerned that there's another bomb, which apparently they were actually taken off to Times Square.
Right.
That you can do it, but for some reason.
Right, and they did it for a very brief period of time. Basically, they asked them a minimum number of questions about additional bombs, but then they gave him a lawyer, and surprise, surprise, he hasn't said a word since.
And I recall, David, that President Bush pretty much said, either you're for us or you're against us. Yeah. And I found it really interesting that Russia was notifying us, I guess over a year ago, that this was a possibility. So I just pray to God that we're doing what we need to and learning from this circumstance.
Well, again, we need to look at this carefully, not to point figures, but to learn and to not make the same mistakes again. And it does seem like, given the warnings about this individual, our agencies could have followed up on him more thoroughly.
Let's shift gears a little bit in the sense that instead of just focusing on our borders here in the United States of America, all the turmoil, particularly in the Middle East, but in so many different areas.
A lot of threats. Syria, pretty clear the dying Syrian regime is using chemical weapons.
Scary. The red line.
Yeah, that's the red line. Seems pretty clear to me they've crossed it. That's a tough situation. Iran developing nuclear weapons. North Korea probably developing them even more quickly. And,
maybe with Iran.
And rattling their sabers in a very belligerent way. So a lot of worrisome situations.
And David, what I'm reading too is there's a great concern that the Islamist jihadist guys, the radicalized folks in Syria are going for those chemical stockpiles.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the great danger. I mean, it's bad enough that this dying regime is probably using it in some cases against their people. That's horrendous. Yeah. And that's a huge humanitarian disaster. But if you want to multiply that 1,000-fold, imagine those stockpiles getting into the hands of terrorists.
And I'm envisioning what I'm concerned happened in Libya when we went in with the UN and did what we did there and took out Gaddafi, because I think there was 20,000 missiles that are gone.
Right, yeah.
And can be in the wrong
that's a real
hands
danger.
again.
I know Israel, for that very reason, is considering action to prevent those stockpiles from getting into any hands, much less the wrong hands.
I also read recently that Israel's, one of their main guys is saying it's now or never to deal with Iran. So let's discuss that on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines, our United States Senator, David Vitter. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, And I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, very pleased to have on the show our United States Senator, David Vitter. David, we were talking about Israel and Iran. What is your view? Do you support Israel's right to defend itself?
I'm a strong supporter of Israel, and I certainly support their right of self-defense and protecting their existence. I mean, this is an existential threat for them, a very fundamental threat. Iran's bad news for the world, bad news for the U.S., but of course Israel is on the front line of that. And I wish, quite frankly, President Obama would stand more firmly with them in light of that threat. It's gotten a little better since his visit a few months ago.
And the bottom line is, Iran's flat out said, at least their president, that they want to wipe them off the face of the map.
Yeah, you know, the last time we ignored wild rhetoric like that,
like Hitler.
Is when Hitler said it very clearly, and people said, oh, this is just posturing, this is for domestic politics. You know, sometimes it's not. There is evil in the world, and Hitler was an obvious example, and I'm afraid this regime in Iran is another.
It's interesting, our South American friends, of course, Mexico, we're friends with Mexico, but we got a lot of problems with the drug trade and traffickers, and you got weapons, it seems like going back and forth. We've got Venezuela. Now look like Chavez's proteges come up and taken his place. What's your view of all that?
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a even more direct impact on us because of the southern border. And that's why this immigration debate, one of many reasons why it's so important. That issue isn't just vital in terms of the economy and who we are as a nation. It's also important for national security. We need to get that right.
Absolutely. In fact, I've read a good number of articles where they're finding on our side in the United States radical jihadist materials.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, we have cases, and this isn't classified, we can talk about it. We have cases that we know of folks in the Middle East going into Mexico to take up fake Hispanic surnames. Now, what's that about? You know, maybe they want to get a job at a car wash in LA, but maybe something far more dangerous is going on. So it is a national security issue.
And the whole beheadings thing was really nothing that we saw, you know, 10, 12 years ago in Mexico. Now we've seen it a lot there, and we're seeing it in the United States of America.
Yeah, it's scary.
It is a telltale sign to me. So let's shift gears a little bit then. So let's talk about immigration, because I know this has been on your front burner for a long time. It's a hot issue. You got the Gang of Eight, which is 4 Democratic senators and 4 Republican senators kind of getting together and saying, we're going to figure this out. Tell me what your view is.
Well, look, first of all, I want to back up and say what we agree on, what pretty much everyone agrees on. First of all, we are a nation of immigrants.
Yep, amen.
We were built on immigration, and we should be proud of that, and we should really hold that up and celebrate that. All of us are from immigrant families.
That's right.
The question is just when, not if.
And immigrants have always contributed hugely to our society.
So that is a positive. And the other thing we can unfortunately all agree on is our system is broken.
Amen.
It's horribly broken. The question is, how do we fix it? So I think we need to get past some of the divisive rhetoric and really focus in a positive way on how we fix it. My big concern with approaches like the Gang of Eight, also with President Obama's approach, is simply that it won't fix it, because it's, I think, the same model that's been used before of an immediate amnesty, a change in the legal status of these folks here illegally up front, and then promises of enforcement. Then we're going to do this at the border. We're going to do this at the workplace. I'm afraid, I feel like most Americans, there have been so many broken promises. There have been so many failed attempts that we just need to reverse that order. We need to prove out the enforcement. We need to put things in place that work before we change anybody's status. Because otherwise, I think there's a threat that you change the status of 11 million people and you never fix the stuff that needs fixing.
David, I may be wrong, and please educate us, but I'm under the impression if this Congress says a future Congress has to do something, they don't really have to do it at all.
No Congress can bind a future Congress. And
Meaning next year's Congress.
No, correct. So that can't be done. The problem is under the plan, of course, the change in status, the amnesty, if you will, that happens now.
That's right.
That is what can take effect immediately. Whether this enforcement pans out, we'll find out later. And again, I think I am like most Americans and says, when I say, fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me. We need to prove this stuff out because Washington, both parties have promised this
Right.
for decades and it hadn't happened.
That's right.
So let's just get it done. Let's measure it. Let's have confidence it's done before we do these other things.
And as I recall, there's really two basic components. It's border security, path to citizenship for the 11 to 15 million illegal immigrants that are here. And you're saying, and I think it's the Republican position, at least for the most part, conservatives, that no change in status until the border is secure.
Yeah, and we really measure that and prove it.
Right. And the
only thing I would add to that is the border is important, so is the workplace. If we had a real workplace system in place that folks here illegally couldn't get a job, that would change the reality at the border overnight too. So it's workplace and border security.
And the Gang of Eight says, oh, we're going to do the secure border thing. Yeah. We're going to give these folks status, though, probably within 6 months.
Correct.
They've got 5 years, 6 months to come up with a plan on how they're going to secure the border, 5 years to implement that plan, monitor it, see if it's working. If it's not.
When I bring up my concerns, the response is, oh, well, the new status we're giving these current illegals is temporary. It's 6 years, it can be renewed, but it's temporary. Well, my question to that is, who thinks that when these folks are made legal, that any Congress, anyone in the future is going to say, no, we're going to make you illegal again? That'll never happen. So this new status is clearly forever. And before we do that, we need to solve the problem at the border and at the workplace.
You've also attempted to address in the past with bills that you've proposed a lot of issues that result because we have a lot of illegal immigrants. Discuss the various bills that you proposed.
I have a number of separate bills along with other conservative members. Part of my concern about this Gang of Eight approach is it's so-called comprehensive. As a conservative, quite frankly, I'm cynical about anything that's comprehensive.
I read 844 pages.
Yeah, any 850-page bill is going to have plenty of unintended or maybe intended in a sinister way things stuck in it. So I'm sort of cynical about anything comprehensive. I'd much rather go in a step-by-step way and fix some things in the right order, one thing at a time. So that's why I have separate bills about the U.S. visit system. So we track people coming into the country, make sure they leave when their visa says they need to leave. That's why I have a separate bill on birthright citizenship and a bill that would actually increase visas in the STEM fields, which we need for our economy.
In fact, I think currently right now, if you're born in the United States between two illegal immigrant parents, you're automatically a U.S. citizen.
Yeah,
and your bill was saying you need to have
We're the
some
only
legal
country,
status.
at least the only modern industrialized country that does that.
All right, we'll continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines. Our United States Senator David Vitter will be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. Again, I'm Locke Meredith, and very pleased to have on the show again our United States Senator David Vitter.
Thanks again, Locke.
David, let's kind of dive back into it because you've been dealing with immigration issues for quite a while. You talked about two different issues that you addressed. Let's
Yeah.
talk about the child tax credit issue.
Yeah, another important piece of the puzzle is these systems we have that act as magnets to bring more illegal activity to the United States. Benefits, other things that really encourage illegal crossing.
Sure, who wouldn't
And
come?
yeah, and quite frankly, I don't blame
Right.
these folks who react to that. They're often in desperate situations. They want a better life for
That's
their
right.
family. I blame us for creating this system that creates those incentives. We need to end those incentives. One is the child tax credit. That's a tax credit under the tax code to help people with bringing up children. Great. It's a refundable credit, which means you don't have to earn a bunch of income and then get a deduction or a credit off that. It can be a check that the government sends you.
So we send
You don't have
money in the mail.
Yeah, it's a check from the government. It's a benefit. It's quite frankly, a veiled term in many cases for a welfare check. And it's going to thousands, tens of thousands of illegal families right now who do not qualify under the law. The IRS's own estimate is that there's about $4.2 billion a year that goes to illegal alien families that don't qualify. It's a pure enforcement issue, and it can be fixed if we just put a requirement of a valid Social Security number or something like that in the law. And the IRS own Inspector General has said that. We just need to do it.
Wow, amazing. Let's talk about the sanctuary cities bill.
Yeah. Another good example of something that encourages more and more illegals to come to the country. We have federal law, of course, that makes that activity illegal, but so-called sanctuary cities or local jurisdictions that say, we're not going to help enforce that federal law in any way, shape, or form. And we're not going to cooperate with federal authorities in terms of immigration enforcement. At the same time, these cities get plenty of benefits from Washington. And my legislation is simple. It says if you're not following federal law, because federal law says you have to cooperate with enforcement of our immigration laws. You don't have to take it over. You don't have to do it yourself, but you have to cooperate with federal officials. If you're not going to do that, you shouldn't get federal benefits either.
David, I was actually reading, and we were discussing it, that I read there's an estimate of $2 billion is spent on emergency room health care to illegal immigrants, obviously, which is encouraged by that type of policy in these sanctuary cities.
And we have to educate illegal kids in our schools. So public education has another huge bill. So there's a significant cost to our society.
And that'd be great if we were, not broke as a country with $17 trillion in debt. 105 of our all production for a year.
Yeah.
Let's talk about E-Verify.
Yeah. E-Verify is a system that's been proved out and that can work in the workplace to make sure that folks who are signing up for jobs are here legally, either U.S. citizens or here legally. What we need to do is dramatically expand that system and make it mandatory. There is a version of that in the Gang of Eight bill, so I will give them credit for that.
Good.
But we need to make sure the details are right, and the key is a theme we discussed earlier. I think we need to make sure that's not just in law, in writing, but actually working before we change the legal status of anyone illegally in this country.
And I think there was one other one, voter integrity component.
That's pretty simple. It would simply say that anybody here illegally who tries to vote in our elections, that should immediately be a deportable offense. So that we should take that very seriously as we do, say, violent crimes. And that should immediately be a deportable offense.
Let's talk about a few of the projects that you've gotten that really benefit Louisiana, because you've been up there in I call it crazy land sometimes, D.C. for a while now. And talk to the folks about, for example, the Lake Pontchartrain.
Actually, that's sort of near and dear to my heart, in part because I got that passed when I was a very young freshman House member. It's called the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Restoration Act. And it sets up a voluntary, proactive effort to clean up the lake. It's a very different approach than EPA drafting this huge rule book and throwing it at industry or throwing it at agriculture or local government. It's a voluntary, proactive approach to develop grant programs that can actually clean up the basin. And the Lake Pontchartrain Basin isn't just the lake. It's 16 surrounding parishes,
It's huge.
including Greater Baton Rouge.
Right.
And it's even 4 Mississippi counties. And that voluntary proactive approach has been very useful and has, in fact, made positive strides in terms of the quality of the lake and the whole basin.
Let's shift gears real quick. You've been there for a while now.
Mm-hmm.
Does our system, does the American way of government work?
It doesn't work well enough, I would say that. And I guess the other half of my answer would be the old quote that it's the best system there is. It's just that we have to go through, a lot of turmoil to get to any result. But it certainly doesn't work well enough, and Washington isn't responsive enough, and we need to get back to a more responsive solution to our problems.
It seems like, our founders purposefully chopped up power. We've talked about it between the president, the Congress, it's chopped up in the judiciary. And then for example, in the Senate, you've got it chopped up usually between 2 parties, Democrats, Republicans.
Because most things take 60 votes or more to happen in the Senate.
And decisions, how do y'all make decisions? You've got the committees, subcommittees.
Yeah. People get rightly frustrated about all of that, and people talk about Washington being at a standstill. However, sometimes when you see the alternative,
right,
as we did, quite frankly, from 2008 to 2010, when liberals had control of everything in Washington, sometimes those sort of limits don't strike you as a bad thing anymore.
Right.
So I think we just need to keep that in mind. But also we do need to make Washington work better and try to come together around bipartisan solutions.
How are you educated on an issue that comes up? How do you get your information? I know I guess you get it from the committees and people who testify, but explain to the folks.
Yeah, it's a great question in a lot of different ways. First of all, I spend a lot of time just listening to folks back home here. I live here in Louisiana. We live in Metairie. I'm here every week. I do town halls in every parish of the state, every Congress. So I've literally done over 250 as a U.S. Senator.
Amazing.
I've done dozens more, probably 100 more telephone town halls, which aren't even in that 250 number. Then I try to read a lot. I'm on planes twice a week, so that gives me at least 6 hours a week to read. And then I have great staff who gear me in certain directions, send memos, do research for me, answer specific questions I ask. So through all those different ways, hopefully I get a pretty balanced and good sense of things.
And then the committees, subcommittees, and committees have the power to ask witnesses to come testify?
Sure. We also have hearings before committees, and that's a very good educational process.
Great.
As well.
David, thank you so much.
Thank you,
It's
Locke,
been great
very
to
much.
see you again.
Thanks for the invite.
You're very welcome. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines, our United States Senator David Vitter. Thank you for being with us.